Welcome to Next Time podcast. My name is Sundar. I lead the forensic services at Next Time. This podcast is part of Global Anti-Corruption series. Our podcast is an endeavor to bring up emerging topics of relevance for executives across spectrum of services we offer. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Across the geographies, regulatory environments are changing, business practices are changing, and behaviors are changing with COVID. Anti-corruption in the current environment is bringing newer dimensions with issues around supply chain, healthcare, and other reporting requirements. This also extends to regulatory interventions in current time and the whole new virtual world. In this podcast series, we will be interviewing specialists across regions to gather specific insights on anti-corruption in current times. The region that would get covered today is UK. We have with us Simon leads the litigation and investigation team in London office of Paul Hastings. Simon specializes in global investigations, financial and regulatory crime, bribery and corruption, money laundering, and corporate compliance issues. Simon, welcome to the show.
Sundar, good day to you, and welcome to all your listeners.
Great. So, Simon, I'm sure you're going to be touching upon specifics with regard to the UK and the implications of anti-corruption today. I just want to start with the broader context. How do you perceive the corruption risks in the current environment in UK?
Sundar, that's a big question, but I think it's easily answered. Corruption risks, I sense, are on the increase. And the primary reason for that is, of course, the challenges represented by the current environment with the COVID pandemic. Another complicating factor, dare I say it, is Brexit. And let's break those down. So far as COVID is concerned, we have seen unprecedented challenges to business. They are under immense pressure to protect the bottom line and their finances. And those pressures give rise to temptations to cut corners and perhaps to cut their compliance cost and resourcing, which gives rise to a very difficult environment in which abuses can take place. But we also see that there are opportunities to enter new markets quickly and to gain new opportunities. And the temptation to do so quickly, to take advantage of the situation, may result in corrupt behaviours, where people will pay, for instance, to access to business opportunities or to markets. They may pay to accelerate licensing, for instance, in relation to the manufacture of drugs or PPE or distribution networks. I mean, they're just one or two basic examples of how the current COVID environment is increasing corruption risks. But also in the United Kingdom, we are conscious of impending Brexit. And the question has been asked, is the United Kingdom really going to increase enforcement at a time when it wants to send a message to the rest of the world outside of Europe that it's open for business? Well, my answer is clear, and that is that enforcement will continue and it may increase for one simple reason. Whilst the United Kingdom is open for business, we want to be open for business for those organisations and companies that wish to conduct business ethically in accordance with typical UK standards. Our markets and our finances, their doors are wide open. However, for companies, for countries who wish to compete unfairly with the United Kingdom on the stage of world trade, I think we will see that enforcement will increase. And one thing to bear in mind, of course, are the extensive extraterritorial features of the UK Bribery Act, which has now been in force since 2011. So I think regulators are primed, they've got larger budgets, and of course we've got a relatively new director in the Serious Fraud Office, which is the principal prosecutor and investigator. And it is fair to say that the director is under some pressure to deliver results. I think we will see that very, very soon.
It's very interesting, Simon, the way you had put it across, that the business pressures are going to be critical drivers for some of these non-compliances to happen, or the exposures of such non-compliances to happen. And it's of course for UK, it is not just going to be COVID, it is also the anticipated Brexit impact per se. With that, there is a lot of changes that's going to happen in the government touchpoints, be it in terms of COVID or, of course, in terms of how the Brexit is going to evolve per se. How do you see that change in government touchpoints? For example, companies which only had tax reporting requirements now may have reporting requirements for health of their employees or hygiene of their offices, as the case may be. So, how do you see that impacting anti-corruption or compliance challenges at this point in time?
Well, there's going to be a lot of change, Sundar. What we have seen is an awful lot of change very quickly introduced by the challenges associated with COVID. And I think it's fair to say that the British government has been extraordinarily dynamic in trying to accommodate that. You will have seen a lot of headline initiatives announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer recently, which are intended to be very business friendly and to assist people and businesses in crisis. But we're going to see a lot of abuse of that generosity in those systems. And the danger is that both now and in the future, government will be touching upon these issues much more frequently. As part of the schemes that have been introduced, whether it's furloughing staff, whether it's reducing VAT rates, whether it's extra licensing requirements, or whether it's changes, for instance, in the insolvency legislation to make things a little bit more user-friendly for companies in distress, there will be abuses. And as a result, we can expect that there will be some fierce enforcement for those companies or people that abuse the system going forward. I think it's also fair to say that if we look to the future, there will always be a danger that when the dust begins to settle, or as I like to say it a little bit more graphically, when the tide goes out, dead bodies float to the surface. And what litigators traditionally experience is a real upsurge in work after a crisis has subsided. It's interesting that in an ordinary civil litigation context, typically disputes arise. There's a simple reason for that. When people are making money and times are good, people are quite frankly too busy to start fighting with each other. But at times of distress, when the tide does go out and issues float to the surface, people understand that there is something of value in suing people, in investigating matters, and in bringing claims. And so I think we're going to see a huge surge in litigation inquiries, disputes, arbitration, and linked to that, investigations. We can be absolutely sure that a number of agencies in the United Kingdom, and for that matter, around the world, will really aggressively investigate and enforce against institutions and individuals who've taken advantage of this situation. And they will be encouraged by politicians, the press, and the public to do so. There has been so much pain created to ordinary people as a result of this crisis that, putting it rather bluntly, those that have abused the system can expect an element of revenge, but certainly real aggression in terms of righting the wrongs that have occurred in the current environment.
Absolutely, I think that's very consistent per se, even across geographies. That's going to be something that I anticipate, where the regulators would take active action, because it's in the larger public interest that action is necessary, because it affects the livelihoods of many people. I just wanted to just extend this to another point. Now, with remote working, lockdown and its relaxation or healthcare focus, how do you see risks changing in the current environment?
Interesting one. Some people, of course, have developed a new normal, working from home. And I think we will see many more people adopting that model going forward. But there are risks, of course, that people will be operating from home, processing data in a domestic environment, accessing sensitive information remotely. And one thing that a number of people are concerned about, including myself, in an investigation space, is the vulnerability related to that data flow. Of course, we've seen some really quite egregious examples of state-sponsored hacking. We've also seen competitive hacking to obtain data relating to customers. And of course, we've seen fraudulent hacking in an attempt to obtain financial and personal details. That is only going to increase. I think a number of employers are concerned about access to data in a home environment, and who else may be looking over the shoulder of somebody who may be working from home. Information that's downloaded locally or printed from home is going to give rise to risks and issues. And for that matter, opportunities for fraudsters and those who wish to create difficulty. I suspect there's quite a lot of mischief that has been caused also by the intense competitive environment at the moment. We have seen competitors for some of our clients deliberately and maliciously causing trouble to gain competitive advantage. We've seen a big uptick in whistleblower disclosures, some of which are genuine, some of which again are trouble causing. We're aware, of course, of a large disgruntled workforce who in many instances have been furloughed or have lost their jobs. And the incentive for people to make complaint at the moment is very much increased. I think with lockdown, it's also affected the psychology of a lot of people. And it's fair to say that uncertainty and fear for the future is an aspect of the psychology of a lot of people's thinking. In many respects, that can give rise to new business opportunities and energies. But equally, we've seen quite a few adverse behaviours and consequences as a result of the pressure that people are feeling from working in a home environment. It's a difficult one for employers to control, but the one thing that I think we all need to be conscious of are the brewing and dark economic forces that are going to change the future for quite a few years, I would suspect, not just in the United Kingdom, but further afield and globally. This is going to give rise to a huge different way of thinking, working, behaving, and gives rise, quite frankly, to a whole series of related headaches and challenges for legal and compliance officers who, quite frankly, have got more than enough to be coping with without these extra challenges.
That's very, very interesting, and some of the points that you mentioned are quite insightful. Specifically, the point where you mentioned that the dynamics are changing at this point in time, and there's going to be increased enforcement that will be coming through, and the reference that you made with regard to how when the tide goes down, automatically the borders will float. Some of this also linked to the kind of business pressures and competitive environment that are currently there in the market, given the economic pressures, is very, very insightful. I think that leads to the extended point that I wanted to understand. While you briefly touched about it, I wanted to ask more specifically, how do you see enforcement changing in this current environment? Are we looking at enforcement picking up in the next 6 months, or are we looking at more active enforcement in the next 1 year?
I think the answer to that question, Sundar, is both. Regulatory agencies, not just in the United Kingdom, but overseas, are under intense pressure to be seen to be making a difference, to be guarding against and preventing all the predictable frauds and abuses that we've spoken about. They'll also want to be seen to be moving quickly and aggressively in relation to abuses that are unearthed, either as a result of their investigations or the intense interest that a lot of investigative journalists have placed upon issues that are bubbling up. I think we're also going to see a lot of international cooperation. That's something that has been a trend over recent years, exemplified perhaps by the extraordinary settlement that was achieved in the Airbus case, that could only have been achieved by incredible and pioneering cooperation through 3 agencies in France, the United States, and in the United Kingdom, also assisted by, quite frankly, unprecedented cooperation on the part of the company. That is just one example of where we will see increased cooperation across borders. And of course, if we're dealing with large organizations that are multinational, the possibility for data exchange and cooperation between agencies is in itself going to give rise to increased multi-jurisdictional enforcement action. Speaking plainly, it's big business. We see increasingly around the world extraterritorial legislation being enacted. There's almost a race to improve anti-corruption legislation. I think it's fair to say that the gold standard remains the UK Bribery Act. And I think it's also fair to say that a number of organisations around the world are using the UK Bribery Act as a template for their policies and procedures, because it's not just about defensive procedures, it's also about messaging. We understand this, we are able to deal with these risks, and we as an organisation are safe to do business with. Invest in us, rely upon our supply chains, allow us to represent you abroad, buy our products, and understand that even though we're operating in some risky jurisdictions around the world, we get it. We're safe to do business with. It's that globalization of standards that we see all the time now. And I think there's an important part of that, because if we're being a little bit mischievous about this, we might just conclude that the conventional West is a little bit worried about the incredible emergence of certain global economies that show great potential and, speaking plainly, threats for the future. India, China, South America, huge examples of countries with incredible human and economic and resources that mean that they represent quite a threat to the future to, as I describe it, the conventional West. What the conventional West will no doubt be concerned about is unfair competition represented by those companies. And I suspect that as part of that, they will want to ensure that the armory that they have in terms of their legislation and anti-corruption enforcement is utilized to make sure that the the playing field remains level.
I think that's extremely interesting way to put that across, Simon, and to say not just that the enforcement interest of regulators is not just from the perspective of upholding the regulatory intent that they have, but also looking at how they're creating a broader level playing field for the businesses that are operating in UK and across the globe from UK. So I think I really appreciate that perspective that you have brought on the table. I just want to ask you, now that we come to the close of the podcast, I just want to ask you, what are the 2-3 things that you want to share with the compliance officer in the current environment as inputs that they want to consider in dealing with compliance issues?
I have a very clear message for compliance officers, and I have a clearer message for those people employing legal and compliance officers, and they are as follows. First, for compliance officers and those dealing with legal risks as an organisation, feel empowered. Make sure you understand that your role is more relevant than ever before in the current challenged environment. For companies and their employers, they must treat their legal and compliance staff as though they are their best friends. They are not, in fact, a drag on progress and profit. Companies that can see the future will understand that there will be a far greater focus on compliance and ethics going forward. And compliance with rules and regulations and laws can and must be used as a competitive differentiator. In other words, do business with us because you can trust your money, your supply chains, your reputation, and your business with us. We are a safe partner for you to do business. The problem and the danger, of course, is that in the current environment, companies are looking to save costs and are finding it very, very difficult even to survive. The great temptation then is to reduce costs and to reduce the compliance function, just as it may be laying off other supposedly non-productive workers. That would be a grave mistake. With the challenges and the risks that are present at the moment, cutting corners in terms of legal and compliance will, as a matter of fact, give rise to great danger, likely abuses, all of which, as we said earlier, are likely to be discovered if and when the tide goes out. And if we're right that the level of enforcement will be aggressive, if we'll be concerned that the policies have been abused and that the public, the press, and politicians will want revenge, the pain and the level of enforcement will be more intense than we have ever seen. My advice to companies who wish to get through and flourish after this particular crisis is to invest more than you ever have in your legal and compliance function to keep it safe. Reputation is all. And for those who've got the ability and the resources to get through this, actually, I think there are great opportunities for the future. It's a sad fact that many businesses will go out of business, and many will go out of business for the right reasons. It will give rise to a very, very interesting competitive landscape in the future. But I make one promise based on 30 years of practice, and that is that cream always floats to the top. And those organisations can show that they are better than the rest. I'm absolutely confident will attract the best business going forward.
Fantastic. That was really a clear message, as you said, Simon, and I really enjoyed this session with you. I really thank you for joining this show and then contributing with your insights from a UK perspective. I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Sundar, thank you for involving me. Thank you to your listeners for listening in these very challenging times. Thank you.